Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles. Today is July 10th, 2020. This is Len Edgerly. I am recording this episode from Ocean Park, Maine. And my guest this week, Tony Zanders, intrigued me because of my interest in libraries and technology. He is the CEO and founder of a software startup named Skilltype. After the interview, I'll have some tech tips for you and a content idea that's tailored to the pandemic era, and also some comments. Let's get started. I heard about Tony Zanders in a tweet that caught my eye. He is the CEO and founder of Skilltype, and that is a software startup serving libraries. It helps libraries to find and develop talent in an entirely new way. I reached Tony by Zoom in Baton Rouge on Wednesday, July 8th, and I began by asking about his unusual title, Entrepreneur in Residence at the Boston University Libraries.
It's a carryover from title that I inherited from a firm called Camelback Ventures that I joined in 2017. It's a title you typically find in venture capital firms where they want to give an entrepreneur the resources and space to cultivate an idea into a business. And so I was the inaugural EIR at Camelback. When that appointment ended, and I attempted to launch Skilltype, I still needed a little bit more incubation, primarily to earn an income, and to provide for my family. And so I started to consult different libraries in higher education, which is the industry that I'm in. And through one of those opportunities, specifically with the Boston University Libraries, the relationship was mutually beneficial to the point where, and it made sense for them to bring me on full time as a member of the staff, as a member of the executive team there, in a new role. And it made sense for the role to be titled Entrepreneur in Residence. And it's a non-traditional role that, in my case, is advising the library's executive team to prepare for the future of work, specifically focused on issues related to talent. And so that's my remit there. And there was one precedent in the library industry, specifically at the Library of Congress, that held a position called an innovator in residence.
Oh.
And so it was sort of a play on LLC's innovator in residence role, plus the EIR role from venture capital that we merged together.
And so the idea that you're an entrepreneur in residence, it's giving you a chance and sort of a home to develop Skilltype, and you're also transferring the knowledge and experience you have to be used. So it's sort of, they're giving you a home and you're giving them the benefit of what you know that might be very helpful to them on a strategic basis.
Correct. And it was a decision that was made before COVID. It was pretty fortuitous for us to meet and connect and think through a lot of issues on how to prepare our organization for a time of drastic change. And so for us to, fast forward 11 months to March 2020, when, universities around the world were forced to go and start working from home, among a number of austerity measures put into place because of the economic impact of COVID, in addition to that public health component. It was just fortuitous for us to be thinking through these issues, 12 months in advance.
I have a feeling that it could have felt like you're very sort of calmly in an organized way looking ahead to 2030 when you first came on in 2019, and you're making all these plans, and maybe you're trying to convince people they really ought to start thinking about this now, when all of a sudden, wham, it's as if 2030 arrived about 9 years early.
That's the feeling. And there was a lot of question and skepticism into why this role, why talent, why these issues. The library community does have a host of its own issues that existed before COVID. related to the community's relationship to the publishing community, specifically Amazon, right? The impact Amazon has on the rate people check out books from the library, or the impact companies like Amazon have on the downloading of ebooks and individual licensing for your own Kindle versus sort of organizational licensing. And so there were a host of, more library-related conversations that the community has to struggle and deal with to grow and evolve. And so people were skeptical about why are you focusing on talent? We're not an HR, we're libraries, right? But now people are understanding the importance of this conversation.
Well, and then you've got the whole sea change after the murder of George Floyd, where this issue of diversity in the workplace and finally coming to terms with systemic racism, you almost had two huge reasons to put what you're working on right smack in the present.
It's a good point. One that I don't feel comfortable making publicly. When you just kind of read the room, people are thinking about these topics and the role, this conversation around equity or equal opportunity for all people. In this case, specifically for Black Americans, people are having these conversations, and from an organizational development and organizational management perspective, this is a talent conversation. It's a personnel or people conversation on how do we prepare our organizations to work with people from different cultures. How do we recruit diverse candidates to join our organization? How do we retain them? How do we create an environment where they're comfortable doing their best work? How do we ensure that they're getting equity in terms of pay and opportunities for promotion and advancement? And so these are talent management conversations that sort of merged together because of the George Floyd murder to create one of the richest forms of dialogue and introspection in library history.
Yeah, and I can see that it's broader. It includes race, but it's broader to the whole notion that, as I was reading about Skilltype, that you're trying to help people leave this outmoded way of building and finding and sharing talent. Where did you go to school? What's your resume look like? What boxes have you checked off? To what's your expertise, and how do we nurture your expertise? That it strikes me as a very radical reframing of basically how the job market works. And I'm sort of imagining Skilltype, your software program, your startup. It's like a Swiss Army knife to help people make that change in how they think about the job market. Is that kind of what's going on?
It is. That's the reason why we exist, is that evaluating each other on these proxies. A degree or a credential is just a proxy for us to get an efficient understanding of what someone can do. Those proxies, in my view, have outlived their utility. We're now in a place where, if you studied at Harvard 12 years ago and you got a degree in computer science from Harvard 12 years ago, that has no bearing on your knowledge and your handle on modern software development frameworks. The way that the software development community has begun to evaluate talent is through the number of times you've been able to make commits to a GitHub repository.
GitHub is that's where people share programs, or?
Yep, GitHub is a social coding platform that was acquired by Microsoft now, but it's the largest community for coding and sharing that code. And in that specific niche profession, they've demonstrated a more accurate and more modern proxy for determining what type of contributions can a professional make to your organization. Other industries have not yet adopted this way of evaluating potential contributions, but the credential and the degree, in my view, I think it has value. I don't think it's worthless. But I think in terms of measuring potential contributions an employee makes, I think that depending on the field or the profession, each field and profession has unique verticalized ways to measure one's impact. So in software development, it is commits, software code commits into a repository of code. You can look at the number of times and how frequently someone commits code to a shared repository, and you can look at that code to see the quality of it and how active that professional is in engineering. In librarianship, it looks a little different, but where we're starting is by looking at the skills and expertise that a person has and how often they are learning and sharpening those skills and expertise. And so we look at professional development and learning as the framework to determine one's potential contributions to the organization. So specifically, if you watch a webinar on cataloging or electronic resources, or say ebooks, because we're on a Kindle podcast. So say you watch a webinar on ebooks, and that webinar is 57 minutes long. We want to give you credit for having spent 57 minutes learning about ebooks. And if you do that over 12 months, you may have spent 40 hours learning about ebooks, okay? And the fact that Lynn spent 40 hours learning about ebooks, and we can verify that through proprietary means of looking at the fact what URL the webinar was on and what date and time stamp you know, if we can verify that and demonstrate that and give you a way to communicate that to a potential employer, our theory of change is that the employer will find much more value and information in that, as opposed to you studying library science 12 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And those are the kinds of things that you can do through Skilltype, that you can actually track the webinar I attended, and that's sort of the work that app does for you.
Exactly. And so not only finding the right webinars to watch, the right trainings to take, the right articles to read, you know, you can convert the number of words inside of an article into read time. And so if you've read an article, that we can add to that 57 minutes. We can say, now you've spent another 12 minutes reading about ebooks. You spent 57 minutes watching and learning about ebooks through a video. And so if you look at the big picture, we are trying to reframe the way that we learn. And this ties back to the George Floyd conversation, because much of this is a conversation about equity or equal opportunity. And so in the library community, we have people who are working in libraries that are not able to be recognized for their effort because they don't have the credential. And so the ability for a Black American who may or may not be a single parent, who may or may not have a dual household income, the ability for them to stop working to go and spend 2 or 3 years attaining a master's degree, which is the credential in libraries that you need to advance up the ranks. Yeah. The ability for certain demographics of Americans to do that and incur additional student loan debt is lower than other demographics. And so it has no bearing on their willingness to work. It has no bearing on what they actually know. It has no bearing on the potential contributions they can make to the organization. Yeah. And so for us, it's very much so an equity conversation to say, how can we give people who are hard workers, who are masters of their craft, and they want to learn everything there is to know about their craft, how can we give them an opportunity to be recognized for that, while at the same time protecting the interests of an organization to have a reliable proxy, so that you're not signing into a contract or an agreement with someone who isn't able to provide that service.
Yeah. You know, just as you're talking about it, it strikes me there's a real elegance to it, because in some ways the old model to sort of address systemic racism was you had all these advantages, like that someone like I had, for me to go to Harvard and Harvard Business School. You know that there's a large demographic that's just not the case for. So then you get this thing, well, we've just simply got to get more African-American, brown people going to Harvard. We've got to have affirmative action. We've got to do, and in some ways that's as clumsy and perhaps as an inaccurate a proxy as the initial one. It's just sort of the mirror image saying we're going to take these sort of crude ways to evaluate talent and how we develop it, where with Skilltype and what you're talking about, you can look into the expertise level of anybody from any background, and it's a leveling thing, so there's equity, but it's also giving the library or the software company kind of x-ray vision into, is this person really going to help me with my mission?
And it's up to date. Perhaps a person could be, very vigorous at their profession in their 20s. Maybe in their 40s, they're not learning as much as they used to, or vice versa. One of the most active members of our community is a woman named Eleanor. She is a librarian in North Carolina. She is on what's called a phased retirement from her academic library. But during this time, she's learning more and taking on new tasks and learning new skills more than she did throughout her entire career.
This is because of the time she has during the pandemic?
The time she has during the pandemic, but also professionals who weren't able to retire as confidently as they were before 2009. So if you look at baby boomers, for example, and my parents, both my parents are still working. They're both in their late 60s and early 70s, respectively. And they're learning new skills, new technologies right now as their children. My brothers and I, we encourage that because, it's active and healthy to have an active mind.
Yeah.
But they have a different level of commitment to learning new skills and a different level of maturity when it comes to learning, as opposed to, say, a 17 or 18-year-old going to college. And so we're in a very interesting time where the ability to learn new information right from our sofas is much greater than it is, say in the 90s or even early 2000s.
You made a point somewhere I saw in your materials. When you think about the way that we are watching content, we're it's episodic. Sometimes we're binging. Sometimes we're just sort of sneaking 10 minutes at Netflix when we should be doing something else. And I think I sometimes, as a baby boomer, I think that's not the right way. I should, start a book and finish it. I should watch a show, but it's actually a good way. It's entertaining, and it's a richer way for me to experience all of this stuff. And there's a parallel. It seems what you're saying is that people can learn binge learning, snack learning, all the different ways to. There's sort of a parallel between the entertainment and then what you would do actually to increase your expertise. That was pretty interesting. That's
one of our first principles for developing Skilltype is that there's a relationship between education and entertainment that we can explore. And this isn't new behavior that we're trying to create. This is how we're wired. And so our social patterns right now are to catch a YouTube video here, to listen to a podcast there. The question becomes, how can, firstly, we capture the long tail from a measurement perspective? How can we capture this and measure it in a way that can actually be used in a conversation around a performance review, right, or in a conversation around applying for a job, right? That's the challenge. But to get one another to get into the mode of consuming information in bite-sized chunks at our own pace, asynchronously, we're already there. Because that's how we're wired.
Yeah, you're just giving people a chance to measure that reality in a helpful way, and looking who to hire and how to develop them once you have them hired.
Yeah, to measure it, and from that perspective, we're inspired by the Quantified Self-Movement.
What's that? I'm not familiar with that.
Quantified Self is a movement that's been around for a long time. It inspired companies like Fitbit and others to start tracking our steps and things. It's a sort of a modern framework for self-improvement to understand, I guess the basic principle is if you're able to measure different parts of your personal development, you then can visualize how far you've gone and how much you have to go. I don't know whether it's a nonprofit or not, but it's a global movement that's been around for decades, I think, to sort of start to count and measure and quantify ourselves. Some of those principles inspired me at Skilltype to understand how can we apply this to both our learning, but also to our work, which was something we think about is when we think about the future of work, what will it be like in 2030 to be in a modern workplace?
Well, when you think about that in the library industry, the future of work, 2030 or pick a year, obviously libraries in the past 10 years have gone through so much change, largely because of ebooks and other technological changes. But when you gaze out, particularly through this lens of expertise, what's it going to be like to work at a library in 10 years from now?
I see the relationship between learning and work coming together. We have one calendar we have one 40-hour work week, and how we spend the hours on that calendar, whether it be working or learning, I think the conversation is going to come closer together for two reasons. One, organizations no longer have the luxury of hiring someone every time they need expertise. And so the idea of a full-time job search or launching a full-time search, that luxury is gone. And so right now, every university around the country and the world is on a hiring freeze right now. So if you just Googled university hiring freezes, you're going to see this. This is going to force institutions to think differently and creatively around how to get the expertise that they need. The obvious way is through developing an understanding of what skills you have today in your organization, what your organization is interested in learning, looking at the gaps on the expertise and filling those gaps with people who want to reskill and upskill. And so our places of work are going to think about, they're forced to think about a new way to acquire skills, which is around investing in learning. And so us thinking that learning has to happen on this time, on our own dime, and we have to work over here, I believe in the future that conversation is going to go out the window, and employers are going to understand it only benefits me and our worker for us to invest in that learning. And so the way I say this is work will feel more like school, and school will feel more like work, because the corollary to this is that schools and universities are trying to understand how can our curriculum better prepare our students for the workforce. And so that's the other side of the conversation that I'm personally not tackling through Skilltype, but you have a lot of organizations that are now focused on how to ensure that the degrees our students receive and the education our children receive in K-12 are better preparing them for work. So again, bringing back the apprenticeship model and things. So these two separate dialogues, I believe, are going to sort of blur the lines between working and learning in the future.
Skilltype, as I understand it, is pretty much aimed at the library sector. Do you foresee a time when you would be expanding out to other industries, industry by industry, because you would be tailoring the needs for expertise to a specific industry? Or at some point, is it simply a way to talk to employers and job seekers in any industry?
It would be an honor to have to work that conversation out. I think understanding how difficult it is to create a technology startup from scratch and to get someone to pay you money for your service, it's no easy feat. And so we just try to take things one day at a time, 1 week at a time, and earn the business of our customers. Given everything going on, it's kind of difficult to think about expanding to other industries and things. But that's right now we're just trying to focus and do one thing good.
Yeah. Well, now if somebody was listening to this and they were, as everybody is, in some period of limbo and discerning what's the way forward in their life and their career, and they wanted to try Skilltype and find out what their expertise is it the kind of thing that an individual can just go to skilltype.com and create an account, or what would it look like for an individual person that wanted to follow this further?
Yep, it's a free application for anyone to use. Because we're focused on libraries and information professionals right now, a lot of the experience won't be that relevant unless you want to work and learn in this industry. But if you are working in libraries or you're at a corporation as a librarian inside of a corporation, or you want to one day, I'd encourage you to sign up, give it a try. It's free to use. We earn our revenue through our partnerships with organizations. Mm-hmm. And so organizations pay us to understand more about their employees and about their community to make more data-driven decisions around reskilling and upskilling.
And then is there kind of a social media aspect that if you entered in, you were aiming at the library industry and you go through the expertise evaluation, is your expertise profile then available to people so that it's almost like a LinkedIn thing for librarians who are thinking of themselves in these terms?
It's the natural assumption to compare us as a sort of LinkedIn for libraries, but it's not a social network. You can't friend anyone. You can't connect with other individuals. Most of our professional development and our learning is a private experience. It's actually not all that flattering. It's the messy part of our career management.
Why do you say that? That's interesting. Mainly
because it's us working through the process of not having everything figured out. What do I want to learn? What job should I be thinking about applying for? Not only do we not have answers to many of these questions, it's more so an exploratory process, but it's also a very vulnerable process. Right. And the pressures that we learn that social media creates to create this sort of performative experience where we always have to have the right face or the right words, mm-hmm. and the pressure created by social media, we think is sort of antithetical to the type of user experience we want to create, where we should feel free and open to sort of explore at our own pace without the added pressure of having to impress someone. Yeah. So the user experience is more zen. It's mostly you. However, at the right time, when you are ready to share your expertise with an organization, we are working on ways to do that will feel markedly different from a social network. But we'll incorporate social features, but it'll be far more sort of thoughtful and tailored to this particular use case, as opposed to saying, oh, the library industry needs yet another social network.
How long does your appointment at BU have an ending point? How long did you sign up for?
It was originally a 1-year appointment that they chose to extend another year.
Great.
It's a very unusual time, not just at BU, but around the world. If anyone's watching the news, it's hard to sort of, tell what the future will hold. We're just taking it week by week. But universities are learning new information around their economic situation every week, just like cities are in our states and our government. And so every morning I wake up, there's a new headline that's impacting higher education with regard to COVID-19. I'm there to serve and help and advise and contribute as much as I can. Mm-hmm. But again, just sort of taking it, 1 week at a time, 1 month at a time.
Anything else you'd like to mention that we haven't talked about the work and effect on libraries or ebooks or anything?
It was a more wide-ranging conversation than I expected, and I think it's an honor to serve in the library profession. It's a profession that most people don't realize actually has its own culture and its own economics. Most of our relationship to libraries is, in our communities through public libraries, and either with ourselves or our children, sort of checking out books and getting access to resources in our local community libraries. But it's actually a much more sophisticated industry and market and community that's global. And so my niche of academic librarianship, if you consider every college and university in the country, and in every country has a library, and they spend large sums of money on products and services with software providers, with publishers, even with Amazon. And so it's pretty niche, but it's a very mature, established space that is ripe for innovation. And I think there needs to be more people, more companies, more entrepreneurs that are committed to the preservation of this industry. Because as we learn about fake news and the influence of media on shaping society and elections and things, the need for professionals who commit their careers to quality information management, information literacy, teaching students and researchers how to access the right information at the right time. We need more professionals who are committed to this work, and the society is only better when we invest and fund and support this work being done. And so I think libraries are going to have a renaissance, both in local communities, but also in their role in shaping research. The libraries are at the forefront of the COVID-19 response, providing access to scholarly material and research to help find a vaccine potentially, but also to understand the implications of this virus. Much of that work that's happening is happening in the university library and inside of medical libraries as well. And so the issue that I described the library industry with having is not a substance issue. It's more of a marketing problem. The community is so selfless and so servant-oriented that they're uncomfortable bragging or promoting their actual work and contributions. And so, but once you discover what's happening in libraries, it's captivating. They just have a problem communicating that to the rest of the world. And so I encourage anyone to sort of peek behind the curtains of what's going on at your local public library or at your university library, for sure.
Well said. I have been speaking with Tony Zanders, founder and CEO of Skilltype. Thanks very much, Tony.
Thanks so much, Len.
I've got some tech tips for you next. The first is a roundup of the 3 Kindles that are on the market now, the Basic Kindle, the Paperwhite, and the Oasis. And this came from NBC. And I like it because it's as if a reporter had been assigned by NBC to go and check out these Kindles, figure out what they're like and whether they're any good. And there's a freshness to the writing of this article. It's by Whitson Gordon, and it was published on the net July 9th under the NBC logo or brand. The title is Why the Amazon Kindle is a Bibliophiles Digital Must-Have. After covering this for 12 years, this is not exactly news, but as I say, I do like the perspective out of it. And as I go through the article, I'll share some things that I was able to see the Kindle with some fresh eyes because of this article. One thing he mentioned is that since the launch of the Kindle in 2007, there have been more than 15 different versions of Kindle e-readers. Now, this is not counting the Kindle Fire tablets. These are just the e-ink Kindles. And that's a lot of updates. And, you know, I covered some of them. There were events where I would go and get a chance to see one of these a little bit early. Lately, they tend to just come out as announcements. There isn't quite the rollout there was in the earlier days. But it is a relentless march of products being updated every year or two and with significant improvements. We've probably got some possibility of color e-ink coming and other improvements in the future. There's no sign that Amazon is taking its foot off the accelerator in making the Kindle hardware constantly updated in features large and small. So interesting, more than 15 versions. And this writer started by noting that you can read an ebook on a phone or a tablet, and you can use Kindle, you can use Apple, there's Kobo apps, but the Kindle e-reader is totally different. And it has e-ink, it's black and white, it has weeks of battery life, you can read at night or outdoors. These are things I'm sure everybody listening knows about. One thing I would take issue of this is I don't think it's even worth mentioning the Kindle's browser, but this reviewer did say, and there's a browser. It's probably so-called the experimental browser, 12, 13 years after it was introduced. The problem with the browser on the Kindle is just it's way too slow. I mean, it uses e-ink, and if you're used to zipping around on the web on your phone or your tablet or your computer, if you find yourself needing to do something on the web on your Kindle, it's going to be all of a sudden you're in slow motion. Everything is happening really slow. But if you're on the beach and you've got to do something on your web, it is theoretically possible. And I think one of the reasons that he didn't mention, the Kindle gives you some freedom from the browser because the browser is so terrible. You're just really going to read your books or whatever your content is on the Kindle and not worry about what's happening on Twitter or the various places that you'll easily zip to on something that has a faster browser on it. So I wouldn't worry about the browser. There is a mention of the ability to read articles on the Kindle using Pocket. Now, this is something I think I tried a while back. I don't use Pocket regularly, so I would have to sort of set up my Pocket account or figure out what the password was to try it. But there is something related to Pocket called P2K, and I started trying this out tonight, but ran out of time, and this has been a long day, so I need to get the show up. But I'll have if you're interested in this, just go to the NBC article, which I'll have in the show notes at thekindlechronicles.com, and there will be a link to Pocket and P2K. It's basically if you're gathering articles by Pocket from the web, and then you can set up P2K to do regular uploads to your Kindle, probably using the fact that each Kindle device can have its own email address. I think that's sort of a clunky way to transfer things to the Kindle. I like just using the Send a Kindle app on my Macintosh, and there's also one for the PC. But if you're looking for a way to get articles to your Kindle, you'll find it in this article from NBC. In other words, the writer sums up, the Kindle is incredibly versatile, and even if you have a good tablet, Amazon's e-reader is a worthy addition to your summer gadget toolkit. Well said, brother. I like that. When he gets to the specific descriptions, the basic Kindle, $99, calls it a steal for what you get. Thousands of books you can have on this. And then the Kindle Kids Edition, $109. There's a bundle case and 1 year of Free Time Unlimited, which is the content menu for kids, and a 2-year warranty. He says that the Paperwhite offers sharper text. It's water resistant. It's good for magazines and comics because of the sharper text. Interesting point. And he recommends either an Amazon cover or a third-party cover, Moco or Finty. I have a Finty cover for my Oasis, and I love it. It's got a picture of a bookcase, and I can use it as a stand in addition to having it be a cover. The Oasis, he notes, is almost twice as expensive as the Paperwhite. It's got a 7-inch screen. It's brighter, more uniform lighting system. You can adjust for a warmer hue, kind of a sepia color, and of course it's got real buttons, which some of us do love. As for the Fire Tablet, also another great way to read books, he says it's a decent tablet for its low cost, but it's nowhere near as good as an iPad, and if you want something to read books on, I think the Kindle is a much more suitable choice. Another resource if you're thinking about buying a new Kindle or introducing Kindle to someone, just about a little over a year ago on June 9th, I created a 20-minute video that's available on YouTube titled How to Choose a Kindle. And my grandsons, Ryan and Jake, helped me out. They're holding up the Kindles, and there's a little intro and outro from them, which I enjoy watching now because now they're a year older, but they were still very helpful when they were 5 and 3 years old. Now they're 6 and 4 years old. That's kind of my deep dive of all the different aspects of the 3 Kindles, and probably more of an aficionado's view of the Kindle as opposed to this overview that ran in NBC. Useful piece. I enjoyed reading it, and you might also. A second tech tip is hands-free Alexa for iOS and Android. This is in a GeekWire article by Todd Bishop and Lisa Stifler, ran July 7th, 2020. The idea here is if you go into your Alexa app on your phone, you can look for Alexa on this phone. That's under settings. And then there's an enable Alexa hands-free button. So if you enable the Alexa hands-free button, it means that if you're using your phone and you have the Alexa app on, you can simply say, Alexa, do this or that. You don't have to tap on the button which activates Alexa from within that app. I'm not sure how useful this is because you've still got to tap to get to the app and then you're hands-free. So you're not really hands-free if you have to tap to get to the app. But it's still an intriguing enhancement of Alexa on the iPhone and iOS. By the way, as I was I wondered about Apple Watch. I love my Apple Watch. And at this point, there is still not kind of a native Alexa app that I can put on my Apple Watch, which I think would be pretty cool. But there is a third-party app called Voice in a Can for $1.99. And I'll have a link to an article in Wareable.com by Conor, Allison from January of 2020. In the video demonstrating this, it's really slow. You can see the person raise their Apple Watch, as I do when I'm using Siri. And instead of Siri coming on right away, it's this fairly long pause before you see the blue light showing that Alexa is listening. At that point, you can say, Alexa, and then you have to wait again to give the command. After that, you can actually do things, and the person is demonstrating it by showing you can be riding along on your bike and bring your Apple Watch up and turn on the coffee maker in your house using a smart device from your Alexa system. Is there likely going to be an Alexa app for the watch that's an Apple approved app? Well, this person doesn't really think so because of the competition between between Amazon and Apple. But sometimes they have broken through. I think music is now available on both platforms, or they play nicely with each other. And maybe sometime down the road there will be an Alexa app for the watch. I think that would be pretty good. I have decided to send the Echo frames that Jim Jones in Omaha kindly made available for me to purchase with his invitation. I'm going to send them off to my optician place in Denver to get my prescription lenses put into the Echo frame so that I'm actually going to be able to try it out. And, of course, that would be a case. If I had the Echo frames, I wouldn't need to be worrying about an Alexa app on my phone. If I'm riding along on my bike and I want to consult Alexa about something, I'll simply speak her name as I'm riding. My ears will not have any kind of AirPods in them. And I think that's going to be the main use case for them. It was kind of expensive to get those frames put in, but I thought it would be useful to actually try out these Echo frames because I think they're probably one of the more intriguing new products which was introduced last fall in spreading Alexa to new areas. The final tech tip regards Prime Video. Amazon has announced video watch parties. This is an item that was forwarded to me by John Aga. And if you see something that is video on demand, a title that is included in Prime membership, and if you have a Prime membership, you can share the link to this particular show with up to 100 people. They all have to be Prime members, and this is all in the U.S. so far. But if all of these conditions are met and you find a show that is available, you can send links to all these people, and then as the host, you can all be watching the show at the same time, and there's apparently a chat bar on the right, so you could be chatting notes to each other. This is something which I think is getting some purchase on other platforms like Netflix. People are apparently, within the pandemic, maybe it's like going to the movies with a bunch of friends. You can say, hey, let's all watch this particular show tonight. And I can imagine that would be sort of fun. I haven't set one up myself, but it's an interesting expansion of the benefits of Prime membership. watch parties. If you have one, if you've done one of these, I'd love to hear what the experience was, who you invited, what you watched, how easy the interface was. You could send me an email at podchronicles@gmail.com. I'll close with a comment that I received from Dan, who wrote, "Hi Len, just checking in to see if you've experienced the change in the flash briefing. I have a flash briefing titled Morning Journal, and I've talked about it quite a bit. I do it each day. It's up by around 7 a.m., but it feels there's been a change, as Dan describes. He writes, now when you ask Alexa what's new, she tells me that asking that will now tell me news from one news source. Did you mean your flash briefing? If you did, you will have to ask for your flash briefing." He says, "I can understand if Amazon wants to highlight the news. I find it awkward now. It's very easy to say what's new as I'm getting up each morning. It's difficult to remember to stop saying that and asking for my flash briefing. Plus, it's a mouthful. I was curious if this is something new for everybody and if you had any inside information for the change. Thanks, Dan." I did send an inquiry about this to my contact at Blueprints, which is what I use to get up my flash briefing on the Alexa system. I haven't heard back, and I haven't run into this change. I can still get the flash briefing by saying, "Alexa, what's new?" I think others who I know in the family and friends are getting it that way, so maybe this is a change which is rolling out. But if you're having trouble getting the flash briefing the usual way by saying what's new or what's my news, try saying what's my flash briefing, and it may be that way you'll be able to get it. Later, Dan wrote, "Alexa says, Daniel, now when you ask for the news, you will receive the news from one long-form source. If you want your flash briefing, you will need to ask for the flash briefing. Do you want your flash briefing this time?" So I guess what we can see is that instead of throwing my morning journal and everybody else's sort of homemade flash briefing together under the news category, they're giving the real quote-unquote news sources a chance to have kind of a digest that will be formed when you ask for your news. And if you want flash briefings, possibly the ones that are being created by Blueprint, you're going to have to specifically ask for the flash briefings. Understandable, but as someone who is a flash briefing devotee, and I really love doing this morning journal every morning, it's disappointing to me because it makes it slightly more challenging to get it each morning if it's really something that's going to be rolled out to everyone. By the way, I decided last week to go to a 6-day-a-week morning journal. Sundays, I don't run, I don't play guitar. I kind of drop all my disciplines on Sunday, and I had been keeping the morning journal going. I'd shifted to reading a poem each Sunday, but I think I'm going to just take Sunday mornings off, and it's sort of a vote for the continuing sustainability of morning journal, because if I have that one day off, I've known in my own way of doing discipline that I'm much more likely to keep something going if there's a break in the daily routine. So 6 days a week, never on Sunday for the morning journal. I'm not sure yet who my guest will be next week. The anniversary show is coming up. I'm not going to make too big a deal of it, although I have invited Jeff Bezos to return. He was on the last, on the 8th and the on the 4th and the 8th anniversaries, I had an interview with him in person. Obviously, it won't be an in-person interview, but I did put the request to Amazon, and I heard back that it is being presented to whoever's involved in Jeff's schedule. I don't even know how close I'm getting to Jeff's office at this point, and what's today? It's the 10th, so in 16 days. Sometime between now and the 26th, maybe I'll get word that there'll be a chance to talk to Jeff again for the anniversary. I'm not holding my breath, but it would be a really fine treat and a way to celebrate. Can you imagine doing this every week for 12 years? It's still a lot of fun. And I appreciate everyone who's listening. Thanks.